Welcome to the Cult is King podcast. I am your host this time around, Rambling Bones, joined as ever by my co-host, the Duke.
Howdy.
And Duke, what is it that we do here?
We review cult movies. Well, more like give trivia about cult movies. We're not very hard judges.
Yeah, well,
But,
we might be a little harder this time.
Maybe.
But
We talk about those movies that are just outside of the mainstream, or in case of this one, movies that are way outside the mainstream.
movies that you might say have a cult following, hence the name. And it's November, meaning it was All Request November. That's what we're calling it now.
Yep. Shout out to Steven, who
Yes.
requested Supervan, 1977.
Yes, I picked Steven's request, and yeah. Before we even get into initial thoughts, let me give a quick synopsis. This movie's pretty light on the plot, so I don't think it'll take me too long here.
I'm about to say, I think in the hour and a half runtime, I would argue that about 20, maybe 30 minutes of that is actual plot.
So our main character is Clint, and he is going to take his van, the Sea Witch, to Freak Out. Freak Out is what's called a van in, or it's like a van festival with all these different vans. And he is going to attempt to win $5,000. On the way, he picks up Karen. She is, I say secretly, it's not really that big of a reveal. It's barely important, but she is the daughter of a guy named T.B. Trenton, who is just a bad business executive.
He's an evil corporate overlord.
You can tell this by the fact that he talks on two phones at once and always smokes a big cigar.
He even hates rock and roll music.
Yeah, he hates rock and roll music. He wants them to put big gas-guzzling engines in his vehicles. He's just a bad man. But when Clint picks up Karen, he saves her from a group of bikers and manages to destroy his van. So he goes to his friend Bosley, who is like a van scientist.
He apparently has multiple degrees, and I guess he works for
Trenton.
It's like, what, Midwest American Motors, I think, is the company.
Yeah, I don't know.
But, yes, and he has, instead of doing his job, he has developed a super van, if you will.
Yes, Trenton wanted one kind of van, but instead, Bosley decided that he was going to make Vandora, which is a cool-looking van. Its main feature is that it's, like, all four walls are glass.
It's also
it's just a lot of window.
It's solar powered.
Yeah,
Trenton isn't gonna like that.
Yeah,
because he produces oil.
Yeah, he hates the environment. And so Clint and Karen they go to Freak Out. Trenton is sort of pursuing them because he wants one kind of van, but his van was turned into Vandora, and so he's mad about that. And also, since Karen is his daughter, he's trying to get his hands back on her. When we get to Freak Out, the plot really sort of goes like even more out the window, but you get a sort of little there's a competition there where they have the vans doing, different things, and Trenton recruits another guy at the van festival. I don't even remember his name because he's that unimportant, other than his van is called Gun Runner, and that's
cool name for a van.
It's a cool name for a van. Vandora wins the van in. Spoiler alert.
Yeah, there's a brief aside where Clint goes to prison, but it's okay. Vandora has lasers on it for some reason.
Yeah. The van has lasers. It doesn't have lasers any other point in the movie.
Yeah, I know. It's funny because while it is a super van and we see it briefly use lasers to cut some prison bars, and at one point it plays a really obnoxious sound through a police's radio to keep them from catching it, for most of the time it's just a weird van, except for the couple scenes where it has to be a super van, if you will.
It does remind me a bit of Kit from Knight Rider, which also perfectly segues into the fact that the van was designed by,
George Barris.
yes, George Barris. He's the king of customization, who is also himself in this movie. Like at the very end, George Barris is just there. But he designed Kit from Knight Rider. He designed the Adam West Batmobile.
And also both the Munsters coach and the Dragula.
Yeah. And he did Vandora, which I believe was originally a Dodge Sportsman. But I looked up a picture of the Dodge Sportsman and a picture of Vandora, and
I think they just took like the very
yeah,
basis.
I'm sure they took like the engine and the wheels, and that's about it. It was no longer a Dodge Sportsman by the end.
No, it was a Supervan. So, full disclosure, the Duke is not a car guy.
Neither of us are car people.
Yes, I usually leave the peasants to getting my coach ready. But from my understanding, a Supervan is actually what they called the extended Ford Econolines, which is what the Sea Witch was, which would be a literal Supervan.
I want to real quickly talk about the demise of the Sea Witch.
She left us too soon.
I had to take a note as soon as it happened. Where Clint rescues Karen is in some junkyard. And you know how junkyards, they have like this big metal contraption that like crushes cars? He
manages to back up into it?
Yeah, he manages to back up into it. It's sort of like the way it's filmed and everything, it's not a case of like, oh, that looked like he accidentally did that. It's like, oh no, I don't want to hit that. Oh no, I think I'm gonna hit it.
As he just backs into it.
As he slowly backs into it, you know. But then when the Sea Witch is being eaten, there are literal elephant noises being played.
Yes, I'm not sure. I'm not sure why that is.
Well, I heard another like vehicle crash noise, and I swear it's from a cartoon. It sounded exactly like something I'd hear in the Jetsons or the Flintstones when a vehicle hits another vehicle. And it's only that scene in the junkyard where I'm noticing like cartoon sound effects.
Well, and that's another funny thing I noticed about this movie. That kind of goes in with what you're saying, where he like backs into the car crusher, and there's no way you could have had that as an accident. Sometimes during the chases, because the police chase the Supervan, sometimes the police seem to just crash for no reason. Did you see that?
Yeah.
Like, it's not like they went over a ramp or something. They just kind of turn and fall over.
Yeah, let me put to you guys this way. This is not a good movie. It's not a... I'm not going to say it's not a bad movie, because it is a bad movie.
I'm not going to argue that this is a great movie, but I'm going to say that this is a movie that might interest some people, and that for some, there's going to be a part of the population, car guys and people who love the 70s, who should watch this movie.
For me, I would recommend not watching it the way I watched it, which was by myself. Typically, when I watch a movie, I can watch it with other people, but I prefer no peanut gallery.
Yeah, I'm not allowed in the room when he's watching movies.
Yeah, I can't. This is a movie that actually I think requires a peanut gallery. I won't say I hated it, but I was sort of like, man, it's been a while. Is this movie over yet? I needed a little something more to it.
You have to, I think if you're going to enjoy this movie, you have to take it for what it is. And I mean, there's really kind of 2 points to it. One, it's a time capsule. So if you're just wanting to basically attend a van in the 70s, I mean, this is the closest you can get, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what really most of the footage is I wouldn't be surprised if they literally just had a camera around a van convention or brought in a van club. A lot of the footage is dedicated to just showing people doing stuff that you would do at a van in, doing like competitions, looking at each other's vans. There's lots of footage spent looking at the murals on the sides of all the vans.
Yeah, that's one thing I did like was when you actually got to see like the van murals. I thought that was pretty neat. That's actually pretty much how the movie just ends, is it's just a compilation of different van murals.
So, I mean, that's the second thing, right? So if you're really into the 70s, you might enjoy this. Or also if you're just really into vans, which, I mean, the van subculture isn't what it was in the 70s. it's still very much a thing. Van-ins are still a thing, and I'm sure they're not quite as big or as young as they were then, but it's still mostly people who bring their cool vans and smoke weed, from what I hear.
Yeah,
Which is what this movie is mostly focused on.
Steve, the one who recommended this, we know Steve outside of the wacky world of YouTube comment sections,
Boy, do we.
and so I made sure to ask him a question as to whether this was an accurate depiction of a van-in, and he said yes, except without solar-powered vans and no Charles Bukowski.
Who is also in this movie.
Yeah, so there is, during the many like compilation shots of just people being people at a van-in, there is a like wet t-shirt contest, and it's actually quite unoffensive because the footage of this film is not quality at all. So it looks like everyone's just wearing like a normal shirt, it rather than a wet shirt. But Charles Bukowski is the one operating the hose, and he's wearing a shirt that says "Wet T-shirt Contest Water Boy." And now, I'm not a big literary guy, but I have read some of his stuff, and I always sort of got the impression that this was a person who might have a few holes in their gray matter.
Isn't he like some sort of like countercultural like poet type figure?
Yeah. And seeing him in this movie, I'm like, oh, he looks exactly like I think somebody who would write this poetry looks like.
Like an angry old goblin man?
Well, like his shirt is like, I don't think it's supposed to be a crop top. I think it's just pulled up, but his guts hanging out, and he's got, it's not quite a skullet, but it's, his hair has seen better days.
But yeah, well, and it's funny. One of the funny things about this movie to me is the most notable people in it are the people who are just in the fringes, like George Barris, Charles Bukowski, or playing one of the cops who are after them is Len Lesser, who you might know from Seinfeld as Uncle Leo.
And he was also in Kelly's Heroes, which I'm not gonna lie, I looked up, who was in this movie before I watched it, and I was trying to even see like who Len Lesser was playing, and it's like, man, I can't tell anybody apart.
Well, they ask about, well, I mean, this is not a movie you're gonna find remastered, but also, I mean, even the heroes really aren't in the movie for a lot of the movie. Would you say that's correct? Like,
it's a lot of action footage of either vans just driving or of people being people. This movie is like a vibe movie. If you just want to like vibe,
it's really kind of like, it feels like home movies of a van convention with some music edited in.
The music I actually like quite a bit.
That was one thing I did want to kind of shout out. One thing I really liked about this movie is this movie has a great theme, Riding High, by David Munyon.
Yeah,
who I've never heard of, but this song is pretty good.
I looked up David Munyon, and it's a case of any of his music that you can find on like an app. It's all like his new stuff. And I have a feeling that's probably the case with all of the musicians who are credited, is you probably won't find any of the stuff they actually recorded in the 70s, only the stuff that they might have recorded nowadays.
Yeah, well, it's despite the fact that the music is good in this movie and that it does a pretty good job of like capturing the time and the feel, there isn't like, they didn't license any big songs.
This is all probably local acts, like
I wouldn't be surprised.
Whoever like just the director or writers knew around wherever they were at the time.
Yeah, I don't know, that almost kind of adds more to like the authenticity of the movie.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know like George Romero, I forget the name of the musician, but George Romero was very much like a local Pittsburgh guy, and so he would consistently hire this one musician to do the music for his movies, who was also just another local musician he knew. Low budget filmmaking, hire the people you know.
Well, and from what I've heard, like I said, researching this movie was a bear.
Oh yeah.
And I still don't have as much as I would have liked, but I don't know what kind of money this movie brought in, but I heard the budget was around 300,000, and I wouldn't be surprised if a good chunk of that went to the van itself.
Yeah, I could believe that. Dude, I don't know if you noticed this, but in a lot of the action shots with like well yeah, whenever like vans aren't parked and they're doing stuff, did you notice that all the vans look the same and don't have murals?
Oh, all the vans that are in the action shots. Yes, I'm gonna guess that people didn't want to risk their nice vans.
Well, it looks I mean, I don't know.
Though the destruction of the sea, which was a crime.
Yeah, that was because that was a cool vehicle, but it almost looks like they went to maybe a Ford van dealership and were just like, hey, can we borrow all of these vans for a day?
Right. There's like this chase scene going on where the Supervan has broken Clint out of jail, and they have all their van buddies on the CB radios, and they're like all strategically like placing or driving themselves so they're in the way of the cops.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, no, you don't see any of the cool mural vans doing that. They.
Yeah. And the CB radios, I guess I talk about some context around the film and the time period, but when I started watching this, the movie opens up with like vans talking on CB radio to each other, and my initial thought was, are they just blatantly ripping off Convoy? Like, this is just Convoy, but not good like Convoy.
Well, for the record, though, I mean, mostly truckers, but also lots of van people would put those in their things.
And that's when I started looking up the historical context. Well, for one, Convoy came out the year after. So
you're saying they copied Supervan?
I'm thinking Convoy copied Supervan. But this came from an article on the Daily Grindhouse, so if there are inaccuracies, you can't blame me. I'm citing my source. Blame them. But this is vansploitation. We've mentioned exploitation films prior, but and a quick rundown again, an exploitation film is a film that uses a specific aspect as a marketing gimmick. So black exploitation, all black actors, black filmmakers.
Here's Dracula but black.
Here's Dracula but black. We talked about Bruce exploitation a bit. Movies meant to rip off Bruce Lee, so like the great value brand Bruce Lee.
Many of which appear in the movie Inframan, which if you want to hear more about, you can always, listen to that.
But there are many, many types of exploitation film. And so vansploitation was the thing of the 70s. It sort of comes from, in the 50s, we start to get the counterculture starts to develop. You get a lot of hot rod movies.
And motorcycle movies, too.
Yeah, the 60s is when the motorcycle movies really kicked off, with Easy Rider being the capstone of the 60s. And then vansploitation hit in the 70s. Now,
and it didn't really survive past the 70s, it doesn't seem.
No. Part of the reason vansploitation became so popular in the 70s had to do with the oil embargo that happened. So what happened was oil became very, very expensive in America, and they decided to implement a speed limit of 55, like max speed limit of 55 across America. This PO'd truckers quite a bit because, you're slowing down long-haul truckers. It takes them even longer to get places, which means it takes them even longer to get paid, and they need paid now. So CB radios become very popular as a way to communicate where gas is cheapest, but also to communicate where cops are so you can proceed to break the speed limit. Now, since it's the 70s and you got the hippie generation and the counterculture, truckers become sort of they get idolized as sort of an outlaw class, especially with the big trucker strike that happened. Now, from the article, what I got the vibe is the popularity of the van was essentially hippies LARPing as truckers because you can live that nomadic, freedom lifestyle that the truckers have, but you don't have to get a special license to, drive a van. And it's also probably 100 times more comfortable, and you're not doing it for a job. You're doing it because it's it's fun. And
Well,
so everyone's putting CB radios in their vans, and everyone wants to be a trucker, but not actually be a trucker.
well, and maybe some of them. I wouldn't go as far to say as they're LARPing, but I mean, it is kind of a symbol of freedom, especially if you're like a young guy in the 70s.
Yeah.
I mean, you're basically taking, it's basically a home on wheels.
And I will admit, audience, I have to level with you. I don't like hippies, so I'm a little biased here. I do love vans.
Bones is pretty much just Trenton from the movie.
I'm not quite there.
He's chomping on his cigar and shaking his fist at all the young people.
So one of the scenes that very early on that instantly, like, I don't know, it blew me away was before Clint goes off, he's walking away from his father who's mad at him. And, his dad's like, I built this business for you. You're supposed to take over running the gas station for me. And Clint's, he's got to live his own life. And he's going to go and win $5,000. Now, I'm sure $5,000 in the 70s is a pretty penny. But at the same time...
Yeah, I don't think... They're acting like he's, like, this is his big moment leaving home for his new life. But so far his plan seems to be, I'm going to go to the van and win $5,000 maybe, and I think the plan, I think that was the whole plan. I'm like, I can't tell if he's going away for the rest of his life or for the weekend.
No, Dad, I don't want to own a small, reliable business. I want to go and possibly win $5,000 and smoke weed with my friends. That's my dream, Dad.
So yes, Bones was not the target audience for this movie.
Well, I was not the target audience, but I was just like, man, I hope he's got a plan after the $5,000.
Assuming he wins it. But, I mean, luckily, he was just gifted a magic solar-powered laser van.
He was gifted a magic solar-powered laser van. But I'm not going to lie, though. I almost think I'd take the Sea Witch over Vandora, simply because, A, the cool pirate theming, and B, Vandora just having, like, giant glass panes all around. I mean, I know they're sort of tinted, but even then, I don't know. I looking at it's like, man, this was very exposed.
I like how kind of low-tech the high-tech features of Vandora are. I'm not talking necessarily, obviously the laser is pretty impressive because I'm pretty sure modern sedans aren't yet equipped with lasers. But, like, they have, like, just, like, a sliding panel, like, it's, like, initiating privacy mode. It's just, like, slow panel moving. And the van is pretty empty. It's like they're just in this big glass cart.
Yeah, and...
don't get me wrong, it's kind of cool, but I'm like, this is very strange.
The dashboard itself is also a case of, it doesn't look like the cockpit of the Millennium Falcon. It's pretty limited on the number of bells and whistles it's got there. It's very low tech, high tech,
right.
I guess.
No, you could, like I said, except for a few key scenes, you could just assume it's just a very strange looking van. One thing I love, too, is to show the high-techness of the Supervan. It's constantly making UFO noises when it's just driving around.
And I wasn't sure if this was supposed to be something it was actually doing, but, like, whenever it passes somebody, they, like, fall over or swerve or it's like it has, like, a force behind it and it's knocking people over. And
well, it's also, I love how, like, it's going 95 miles per hour. Which, don't get me wrong, if your van, a van in the 70s going 95 is incredibly impressive. Mm-hmm. But I'm like, wow, this future space beast can go 95 miles per hour.
Especially when it, it knocks people over, it's definitely like going the speed limit.
It's doing its best. It's a van.
It's doing its best. But again, this movie features very, very little plot. The antagonists are like there are some it's like it introduces something and then sort of forgets about it,
Yeah,
and then
no.
it brings it
Even the
up again.
Supervan sometimes feels forgotten about in favor of just more van-in footage.
Yeah, and then Clint and Karen there's like this romance, but it's like Karen is instantly like wants to be with him.
Well, I mean, not. It's like when they meet, they don't even seem to care for each other, and then by the time it cuts to another scene after like 20 more minutes of van stuff, they're in love, I guess. So
Or yeah, it's
at one point he touchingly calls her, that she's one of a kind, like Vandora. And I'm gonna tell you, I know you van people are really into your vehicles, but comparing your girlfriend to your van is not as flattering as you might think. That might get you in trouble.
Yeah. It's not a good romance.
But I mean, like I said, really, if you watch this for the van-in footage, which is just very interesting, especially if you're not like in part of that culture or didn't experience that, then you'll have a good time. If you're here for the plot, I don't have much to offer you.
Yeah, I almost think that this movie more would have excelled as a
Long form music video.
yes, a long form music video. I was thinking maybe documentary, but then I was like, no, I don't want to hear anybody talk. I just want music in van footage.
Which, like I said, it has those things in spades. If you just want to go and look at cool vans, they've got plenty of cool vans with all kinds of crazy murals.
Other than that, like, I know we haven't been talking long like we normally talk.
Well,
I got very little else to say, unless you do, Duke.
I've got some more. I did look at cast and crew and stuff.
Oh, well, yeah, I guess we should talk about them.
So, yeah. So, not a lot of these people were in tons of movies. The star was Mark Schneider. He plays Clint. And from what I can tell, he didn't really have very many movie roles.
Mostly TV.
He seemed to have a long recurring role in Days of Our Lives. I know he appeared on Babylon 5. And I believe a show called Santa Barbara, which I hadn't heard of, but he was in many episodes of. So our leading lady was Katie Saylor, who played Karen, and she was into two movies, or I guess a movie and a TV show that might interest people in this who would watch this podcast. She was in Invasion of the Bee Girls, and a very short sci-fi series that didn't last very long called The Fantastic Journey.
Yeah, a note on Invasion of the Bee Girls. It caught my eye too, and looking at it, I'm gonna say that it looks kinda like a very sleazy exploitation film.
Well,
so I guess if that's what you're looking for,
well, this movie might have even have been considered a little bit of raunchy in its time.
Sleazier than this.
Okay, but I thought it was funny in this movie, like just because of the way the bar has been pushed so much forward, but also because of the graininess of the footage. It's funny how tame this movie is when it was received. All of the weed and the wet t-shirt stuff would have probably been received very differently.
Yeah. Compared to now, this movie is extremely tame, and again, the fact that the footage hasn't.
I mean, I'm not
quite
saying
been...
watch it with your kids, but
Yeah.
Let's see. It's funny because Trenton was actually probably the biggest actor in this,
and his biggest role in a single episode of Briscoe County Jr., the greatest Western ever made.
You should check that out, actually. If you don't know what it is, it has Bruce Campbell in it. That should be enough to make you want to watch it.
Exactly.
But he was played by Morgan Woodward, who played a recurring character on Dallas. He showed up in a lot of Westerns. He was in Cool Hand Luke, which was one of the biggest movies he was in. But I thought it was interesting. If I'm reading...
He was in Battle Beyond the Stars.
Not only was he in Battle of the Beyond the Stars, which is this Roger Corman space movie, but he played the Lizard Man Cayman, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, he played the Lizard Man.
Especially after seeing him in this as, like, just the scenery chewing, I hate kids, like, and I love money guy. It's like, oh yeah, he's also the Lizard Man in a sci-fi movie.
A great sci-fi movie.
Actually, I would be very surprised if we don't cover that. That's one of those gems that you may not have seen but really should.
We did mention Len Lesser Seinfeld, Kelly's Heroes, Outlaw, Josie Wales. Other than that, the actors didn't really do much, but the director, Lamar Card, he also didn't do much, but he did produce Terror Train, Savage Harvest, and Project Metal Beast. If you are a Red Letter Media enjoyer, I'm about 200% sure they covered Project Metal Beast at some point.
He also directed a movie called Shadow Warrior. Make that Shadow Warriors. I can't comment on it. There wasn't much information to be found, but I'm sure it's interesting.
He definitely somebody who had a bigger career as a producer, but it's not really like he had a big career producing. It's just bigger than his directing career. But Terror Train is pretty, I mean, that's pretty significant in the world of horror movies and slashers, and has its own cult following. And Savage Harvest sounds cool.
Yeah, I mean, if it's half as cool as it sounds, it's probably pretty good.
It's probably a fourth, which probably means it's just entertaining.
Hey, though, watching this movie had me thinking. So, Bones, if you had your own Supervan, what kind of mural would you get on it?
Probably skeletons. I mean, unironically.
I was thinking about this last night when I was watching Supervan, and I think I'd get a big mural of the giant claw on it. I think I'd call it the Claw Force 1.
Of the vans, the murals you saw, did you have a favorite?
It's kind of hard to pick. Honestly, I was a big fan of the Sea Witch before its untimely demise. But there was this one, too, that had, it looked like Frank Frazetta type art with, the naked guy or something, but then Mickey Mouse was in it.
Yeah, the first time you see it, it looks like a Frank Frazetta, maybe like Conan the Barbarian type thing. And then you just pan the camera over a little bit, and all of a sudden I'm not even sure if it's Mickey Mouse or like a guy with a Mickey Mouse head. It's really bizarre.
And then there's this one with like a Viking where he has I don't know if they're supposed to be like wolves or polar bears on chains and stuff. There were a lot of cool vans. I also thought it was funny. There was a side character who was a preacher, whose wife unfortunately gets around. When they're at Van Inns, who had a van, the preacher van, and I didn't notice this, but nothing. So to tell you a little bit about our friend Steve, he could watch a whole movie, know nothing about the plot, but know everything about the vehicles in it.
Or random crap you see in the background, like types of boats.
But yes, but yeah, he knew about some random barge in Rocky.
Yeah.
But apparently the preacher van, the van is initially a Ford, but later morphs into a Chevy halfway through. So for you car people, there's a little blooper.
I didn't notice the van change at all.
It was just that white van. It was also cool because we also got to take little tours of the interiors of some of the vans.
Yeah.
With all the shag carpeting, and stuff. And those were pretty cool.
Some of them had a lot going on back there. Even a table and benches set up.
Right. Some were pretty sparse or had a bed in there, but some of them it's this really is somebody's it's like a living room on wheels.
Yeah. I'm sure you could watch this now and feel inspired to have a tiny home, but a tiny mobile home.
Tiny gas guzzling mobile home.
You live in a van down by the river. It's such an aesthetic.
Despite the fact that there was apparently one in the 70s, solar powered vans are not yet commonplace.
Yeah. I think of the van murals, I really liked at the end, there was one that was just hot air balloons.
Yeah.
It's that's kind of just a nice. And then my favorite one, though, the one that definitely my favorite was just a big sailing ship. It was like a classic painting you would see of just a big old time sailing ship. And that if I had a van, I'd get that, but add skeletons to it. That's what I want. It's not even a spooky pirate ship. It's just like a normal ship, but skeletons.
But they're having a good time.
They're not mean skeletons. They're cool, nice skeletons.
Well, as we asserted many episodes ago, it's important to remember the cult movies are about feeling good.
And that van mural would be about feeling good too.
And like I said, if you care about vans, this is a feel-good movie. If you don't, You might be very confused why somebody put all their home movies and called it a film.
But before I forget, I would like to insert the best line from the movie. This movie doesn't have a lot of terribly memorable, quotable, funny lines, but they say a pirate spirit never dies.
I'd like to take that and raise that what I think the funniest line of the movie is, which is, "You look like you were running for president of the Child Molester Society."
I might have missed that one.
Okay, and what's even weirder is it's said by like the evil van owner to Trenton, who then hires him as some sort of van spy. I'm like, wow, I knew that the best way to get hired for, a job was to just immediately tell the boss they looked like a choma. Man, I would have approached life very differently.
Yeah, the other line was just, I thought it was very funny. A, because Steve remembered it. It stuck out to him. But B, when the Sea Witch has been destroyed, he goes to the wreckage and pulls out the suicide knob, which is, yeah, just look it up. But he pulls that out and he's just like, they say a pirate spirit never dies. And it's not quite a non sequitur. It relates, but it's just like, what?
I like one point too. He's looking at the knob and Karen looks over and is like, what does she have that I don't? Because it has like a little pirate woman on it.
Yeah.
I think at one point too, when he's like talking to somebody on the CB, his like handles like Pirate Star.
Oh yeah.
And that is like the coolest name ever.
Yes.
It reminds me of like Step Brothers, where it's like, okay, but you have to call me Dragon.
Yeah.
All right, but you have to call me Nighthawk.
Yeah.
But like, man, I wish people called me Pirate Star. That would really change the trajectory of my life.
Get a CB radio, and well, heck, there were vehicles like when he introduces himself as Pirate Star on the CB. He's not talking to people in a van. It was just a group of kids who also apparently had CB radios in their vehicle there. So you don't even need a van, Duke. You can be Pirate Star right now.
I'm getting, this movie has convinced me to CB. This movie has a third audience. People who enjoy CB gibberish. Because there's long stretches of this movie which are just people going back and forth with CB jargon, which, like I said, for some people they're going to be like, why did anybody take the time to film this? But I thought it was kind of fun just to like hear the endless, chatter on the radios.
Again, like at the start of the movie, I thought they just ripped off Convoy.
Nope, Convoy ripped off Supervan and also Star Wars. Futuristic laser machine. Obviously Star Wars took from Supervan.
So Star Wars. I thought you were saying Convoy ripped off Star Wars, and
Convoy's ripping off everybody. No, Supervan obviously was one of the most influential movies of all time.
I guess I'd have to look up what year Star Wars came out, because this was 1977.
There was also another vansploitation movie that came out in 1977 called The Van, which, despite the fact that I think it has Danny DeVito in it, even though it has a longer entry on Wikipedia, it can't be as important because their van was not super.
Yeah, and it didn't. I guarantee you, it didn't have lasers.
I really, if this podcast ever makes us a cent, I want to go buy a van and I want to get the giant claw painted on it. This isn't just like an offhand joke. I'm picturing this in my brain, and I'm just looking up to God, and I'm like, Lord, if this be thy will, let the Claw Force 1 be born.
Man, go out there and get your dreams, buddy. You gotta make them come true. In fact, instead of getting a small business that sells gas, why don't you go out there and you make the Claw Force 1 real and win $5,000?
Which isn't going to take it. Let's just say it doesn't go like as far as it used to.
Won't quite cover the cost of
filling up the van in this economy.
But I officially am out of things to say. Duke is there anything else you can think
Just
of?
like maybe my higher appraisal of this gem. Okay, no, this movie would be quite rough for some of you, but as somebody whose first driving experience in high school was a Ford Econoline van, I feel
You feel a little
I feel,
connection.
I'm not really in the group, but I'm like, I'm tangentially related, I'm almost in the group.
Yeah, I'll say that this movie is free on YouTube or free on Tubi, but again, the video audio quality is not top notch. This movie, I don't know, it could stand to be saved by somebody like Vinegar Syndrome or somebody who would maybe clean it up a bit, remaster it.
Now, granted,
Probably
I'm
will never
honestly
happen.
I'm honestly unsure whether there'd be a market for it or not, because I'm sure this is one of those things that gets passed around in van circles. But I mean, there's a lot of vansploitation movies. I don't know if this one is especially loved or if it's just one of many.
When looking up vansploitation, this movie is in the list of must see vansploitation films. But at the same time, it's kind of a short list, which makes me kind of think that maybe
It's a very small subgenre, maybe.
there's probably the must-see list might be all of the vansploitation movies that were made. Even if it doesn't have a market, I know there are organizations dedicated to saving film that no one even could dream of thinking about caring about.
That really is, though, sort of a noble endeavor. I don't know why it is, because I'm going to be honest. Am I going to watch Supervan ever again? No.
Yeah, probably
No.
not.
Did I enjoy seeing, getting a glimpse at all of that? Yes. But I'm never watching Supervan again. That being said, do I feel like the world without Supervan would be a sadder place? Just a little bit.
No, it is cool that there are companies that are out there trying to save junk.
Steve's gonna be like, I'm never sharing movies with you guys again.
Yeah, well, he
doesn't sound like that,
yeah.
but
we've ripped apart one movie. Duke, what movie are we going to possibly rip apart next week?
Well, okay, you have to forgive me for not branching out too much, because this is pretty much true to the form of my picks. But we did have somebody request a long time ago a movie called Ghosts on the Loose. So that's what I want to watch.
Well, I haven't seen that.
I like movies that are black and white and have spooky stuff in them. That's my calling card.
Yeah.
I'm actually kind of excited for this one. I had never heard of this, but it looks like it'll be right up our alley. I have not done, just like with Supervan, we're just kind of picking blind here. So I'll have much more to say about it next week.
Yeah, you should tune in next week. Also, I guess we didn't say if we recommend or not. If you like vans, I recommend.
If you don't like vans, stay far, far away.
And yeah, there you go for you. And thank you for listening, watching, wherever you may be listening or watching to us.
And if you're on YouTube especially, you should leave us a comment telling us what kind of van mural you would get. And if you had a super van.
Yeah, you could do that.
It's fun, Bones. It's an activity.
It's time we start giving the audience homework so that they'll be more engaged with our videos.
That's not a homework. It's an activity. It's an fun.
Activity. All right. Well, you can do that. And if you do, we'll very much appreciate it. Maybe we'll even mention it next episode.
Yeah, I'm gonna go on there and I'm gonna like it and I'm gonna tell you that's cool, unless it's not cool.
But apart from that, feel free to like and subscribe. We're on Spotify, Apple Podcast, YouTube, Odyssey, Castbox, and that is it. That's all we're at.
So see you next week and keep it cold.
Goodbye.
Sorry, Steve.